Welcome to Galaxy Brains.
An infinite amount of cash.
I'm your host, Alex Thorn.
The U.S. banking system is sound and resilient.
Bitcoin made a new all-time high.
If you're not long, you're short.
Satoshi's going to come on there, laugh hysterically, go quiet. All Bitcoin's going to be erased.
Bitcoin's the best crypto out there.
Bitcoin is going to zero.
Welcome back to Galaxy Brains. As always, I'm your host, Alex Thorn, head of firm-wide research at Galaxy. Bitcoin not zero, and we have a great episode for you today. Will Foxley, co-founder of Blockspace Media. He is back on the show. He was first here in August 2023. He announced that he was creating Blockspace on that episode. It's now been almost 2 years since they launched. They've got great podcasts. They've been breaking real news about Tether and other stuff. And they've got this fascinating conference now, opnext, where a lot of the discussions about the next protocol upgrade for Bitcoin is occurring. The next one coming up in April will be hosted at the offices of Strategy in Northern Virginia, formerly known as MicroStrategy. So very interesting conversation with Will about Blockspace Media and Bitcoin development. And then, of course, we'll check with our good friend Beimnet Abebe from Galaxy Trading to talk about tumultuous market environment that Bitcoin and everything else finds itself in. And we'll talk a bit about the strategic Bitcoin reserve and Beimnet's skepticism about it. Before we get to that, I need to remind you to please refer to the link to the disclaimer in the podcast notes. Note that none of the information in this podcast constitutes investment advice or an offer, recommendation, or solicitation by Galaxy or any of its affiliates to buy or sell any securities. Let's hop right into it. Let's go now to our friend Beimnet Abebe from Galaxy Trading. As always, Beimnet, welcome back to Galaxy Brains.
Thanks for having me.
We got the SBR executive order signed last Thursday after we had recorded and published our episode. Crypto Summit Friday. Bitcoin not really reacting positively yet.
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
Well, I think there were high expectations going in. So most people expected this, given the executive orders that he signed early on and all of the tweeting that he did, or Truth Social posts.
Truthing.
And so, folks had already, baked this in. And as far as I'm concerned, the U.S. government still hasn't bought a single penny of Bitcoin, and doing it in a revenue neutral way that doesn't have any kind of adverse impact, is quite challenging, right? Like, they can sell gold to buy Bitcoin in theory, and that's delta neutral to taxpayers. But there's also a lot of gold holding Americans. And what signals does that send? And what kind of market impact does that have? And, you're at a time when, he's cutting tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of jobs in the federal government, as well as trying to spend $1 trillion less every year. Like, how can we possibly justify owning Bitcoin in that environment, from a political lens standpoint? And so, I think it's really hard to justify. In addition, I get it. You want to support crypto, but I think buying the crypto asset itself is not really in the best interest of the U.S., from the standpoint of, if you think your currency is the best, flight to quality, flight to safety, global reserve currency, why does it need to be backed by anything? Gold, Bitcoin, et cetera. It's full faith in the Federal Reserve and U.S. government, right? And so, there's a lot of theoretical concepts that I disagree with the market broadly on. In addition, the hope is that it's, it makes other countries want to hold this as a reserve asset, and that's counterintuitive to what the U.S. wants, which is dollar as a reserve asset. And thirdly, of the countries that had the ability to buy it as buy the asset, which one of them hasn't done it yet and that will do it? And are they meaningful enough to move the needle? I don't think the Chinese are going to be I want to go long Bitcoin like crazy. I don't think the EU is interested in that, as they're trying to spend a ton of money. Yes, sure, you can get some, third world countries like El Salvador and some Latin American countries to be supportive of this stuff. But again, that's not going to really move the needle. And so I just think, this is a market that got a little ahead of itself in terms of thinking that the implications of the SBR would be that meaningful. Personally, as far as I know, the way Bitcoin has behaved since the election, it's just another risk asset right now. And if stocks keep going down, Bitcoin's most likely going to go down. If Apple dips another 10, 15% and I get the opportunity to buy, one of the best companies in the world in Bitcoin, like I'm gonna have to think twice about it, right? And so, yeah. And then I think the other big implication is with respect to alts. Like clearly, Bitcoin was differentiated as being better than everything else, even ETH, right? And so, like, if the U.S. government isn't buying alts, which it doesn't look like they will be doing, right? Then your bull case for alts is usage, adoption, etc. And then again, you
Then you're looking at the case I've been making that crypto is the dog that chased the car, and it's now got to learn how to drive the car.
yeah.
That can happen, but it's not a regulatory catalyst.
No,
You know what I'm saying?
that can happen, and I completely agree.
Yeah.
I just think that some of the token prices are pricing in that happening, and then it
Yes.
happening again, and then it happening again.
I think that's right. I think, look, I hear your point. I think, my boss, Chris Ferraro, said it really well last week that revenue neutral or not, you're still selling the dollar when you buy Bitcoin with it, right? And that politically might not be easy, right? But I will say,
No, I will cite the Republican states that have been trying to pass Bitcoin purchase legislation that have struggled.
yeah, some
Right.
of them have struggled. Wyoming rejected it.
Right, absolutely.
Texas, I think, passed it.
And I think you can be on the side of like believing in Bitcoin as an asset, right? And believing in crypto as a huge efficiency gain in the future of finance, but also on the side of we don't need to be purchasing this with tax dollars.
I agree. I think that's right.
And
I think
you
that's
can
right.
hold both of those opinions and,
Yes.
and not be anti-crypto.
Okay, but now the president has ordered that they look for strategies, right? They develop strategies for acquiring more in a budget neutral way. So presumably there will be work that's being done at the Commerce and Treasury departments to see if there is a strategy that makes sense.
Yeah,
they're
if
not
people wanna
ordered. They're not
donate
ordered
Bitcoin.
to buy. Yeah. Well, there are. To your point about the alts, right? The digital asset stockpile and now the strategic Bitcoin reserve. What a swing from, because I was saying this the whole time. The market. We've been saying this for months that, SBR or not, that shouldn't be like trying to caution people, like, because it was very unlikely to happen. And, we predicted in our predictions report on December 31st, I said the U.S. would stockpile but not acquire new Bitcoin. And now they're ordered to try to figure out if they can acquire it. And I'm saying it ain't going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah, and I just believe in due process and kind of judicial, legislative, executive branch and balance of power, right? Like all spending bills need to originate from Congress. It's a body of elected officials that represent the populace. Like there's a reason the founding fathers structured it that
Sure.
way. And like if a bunch of congressmen can't get together and agree to buy something, then it's
Maybe it shouldn't be bought. I think
Correct.
that's right. But
again, I'm not.
But
This
again-
isn't me giving approval to what Congress does or
No,
not.
no. And
I'm just saying.
look,
like,
I think
like
this.
there's a system. In
I
place.
think your view is very well founded. I think it makes a lot of sense. I can tell you that a lot of people I just came back from DC for a big roundtable that it was co-hosted by Senator Cynthia Lummis, and there's plenty of people in the Bitcoin industry who don't agree with that sentiment. Do think it's important to have a strategic reserve. Michael Saylor is one of them, obviously. He says that Bitcoin is not a digital currency, it's digital capital, and that stablecoins are digital currency, and is pushing for both. And if you have a stablecoin explosion, then the Bitcoin can support the balance sheet of the government. And that's the case. Regardless of whether I agree with it or not, it is officially the strategy of the U.S. government. And one of the simplest ways I think that they could acquire Bitcoin in a revenue neutral way. The alts in the digital asset stockpile they're prohibited from buying more alts. They're effectively sell-only mode. Now, hodl, sure, or sell. And that discretion is in the yet unformed office of the digital asset stockpile. So you could say maybe dump some foreign created altcoins and buy Bitcoin with that stuff that government and the people don't even really know the government has, right? And that might be the fact that I would just guess that if you looked at the list of coins that we think the government holds, which, by the way, they're trying to figure out what they actually hold, and there's apparently really good reason for that.
I just
that might
struggle
be
with-
the way that a buy does happen. I think that
fair
that,
enough.
that
And
avoids the political stuff you're talking about.
Yeah, and I get trying to support this ecosystem and this asset class, but again, I'm like, okay, I think the government owns 23 million bucks of BNB,
Yeah,
and so they could easily convert it from BNB.
that would be my top target.
BTC, and that's
Yeah.
a chunky one. But then I look at the 70,000 people at Veteran Affairs that are getting laid off, and you're telling me you want to buy Bitcoin instead of supporting people that supported veterans for the past at least 4 years or so. Biden is like, it's a very hard pill to swallow. And how do you go to talk to the guy in Kansas whose military site is getting downgraded, and like, how do you go talk to these people at the next election, which is midterms, and be like, yeah, I shut down this wing of this Air Force base in Kansas because I thought it was unnecessary, but I bought $23 million worth of Bitcoin.
I get it.
How's that going to hit home with the farmers that are losing?
Well, I don't know. There are a lot of people that own Bitcoin too, though.
No, absolutely.
I'm not sure. That's a good question. I think that is the interesting thing about this political calculus here, right? And I guess we'll just have to wait and see more info on it. But I know it's not going to happen soon. I don't think people realize the White House and the executive order have established this as the policy, but implementing this policy is much more complicated than I think people realize.
And I also just think that, crypto was a main focus and people were thinking about it, but there's so many other things. Even from the administration's point of view, they have so many big things to...
They do.
Like, NASDAQ just went down 13%.
Yeah, I know.
Right? S&P just fell, but people are feeling less good about spending all this stuff, and we're talking about recessionary fears, and you want to talk to me about buying Bitcoin right now?
I know.
Like,
I hear you.
I get it. How many Americans own Bitcoin?
I don't know, 50 million maybe?
50 million.
I'm making that up.
Sure.
I don't actually think it's that high. But
how many Americans
I think the White House said it was...
U.S. equities?
A lot more. Almost, how many households are there?
Yeah, almost any household that can
pretty
afford
much
it.
Pretty much anyone that's ever had a job, to be honest, has likely got some kind of 401k or retirement plan or pension or... Yeah. I agree. I hear you. It's tricky.
Yeah, I think the main story is the economy's slowing down. I heard a little tidbit that from the Walmart CEO. He's saying that consumers are stretched and they're at their last dollars. Savings rate is really low. Credit card balances keep increasing. Delinquencies on credit cards keep increasing. Auto delinquencies keep increasing. I just saw a stat that auto loan rates just spiked higher. And the main guy I follow on this is saying that it's partially a function of them trying to recoup the revenues from the delinquencies that they estimate that they're going to have, not because they think interest rates are going higher, right? And so they're like, Walmart.
That's real economy stuff.
Real economy stuff. Walmart is the single largest employer in the U.S. outside of the U.S. government. Mm-hmm. So when their CEO tells you that consumers are strapped,
they got a good view into that. Yeah. Yeah, and then the CPI came in soft today.
It did come in soft.
But that's partially could be because people don't have a lot of money to spend, right? I mean, if consumer weakness, though, can contribute to deflation, right?
I'm personally, I am so tired of looking at backward-looking data and data measures that everybody's like, oh, look, slice and dice it this way, that way, and it, supports this view, doesn't support the other view. Here's what I know. I know the labor market's slowing down, and I know that labor figures on a 3-month forward and a 6-month forward are going to look much poorer, right? You need to sustain above, I think, 125,000 job gains per month to
offset retirees and stuff.
Offset, yeah, correct, and to keep the labor market balanced, right? What did we see during the last jobs report? We saw the underemployment rate, or the U6 employment rate, jump by 50 basis points. The amount of part-time workers increased by 500,000 jobs. The average hourly work week went down, right? So people are working less, and they're not working as much as they would like, to figures and changes that are typically leading indicators for a further slowdown, right? And we haven't even seen the government job data hit. When you lose a job, there's a multiplier effect, right? You stop eating out, right? So the restaurant gets less. The restaurant has suppliers and vendors, right? And
they buy less.
They buy less, right?
Yeah.
There's a velocity to money, and so when that velocity slows down, your impact isn't just that one job lost. It's really much more, and so market participants can focus on the data print that covers the February CPI, but what does Trueflation tell you? Trueflation is below 1.5%, right? My cousin visited me from DC this weekend, and all he tells me is about, people getting laid off, right? It is that is what the Northern Virginia, Maryland, DC folks.
Have you seen the housing stuff?
The
there?
housing stuff, DC
crazy.
proper hasn't been impacted, but other stuff is getting impacted, right? Home builders are doing poorly, right? There's rents are coming down.
No, but there's like the all the like condos for all these people that worked in the federal government that have already been laid off, and like other people who think they might be laid off. I mean, how many people work for the federal government? Like 2 million people or something?
A lot.
It's a lot, right?
But it's not just the fact that they're getting laid off. It's the level of uncertainty impacts spending. Right? The level of economic uncertainty, like there are charts that measure it, it's like through the roof, through resistance, technical breakout, and measures of volatility. I mean, the VIX has spiked. Like,
you think it's are you impressed that Bitcoin's holding in the 80s given this environment? I mean, I know to be clear, we've been coming down. For all we know, there's more to go. But I just think
it's hold, and then fold. I don't think these. I think
so. You think these levels can break? And
absolutely,
yeah. Well, what a wild roller coaster.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there's also. I mean, the caveat to that is, the regulation policy has never been better for crypto. It's never been easier to buy crypto.
To me, I think
never been easier to
and
be
not
a
even
crypto
just
company.
Bitcoin, but if you look at some of like the DeFi apps and stuff that really work well, you're getting much better like risk reward entry points. I think in this environment.
No, absolutely.
So same thing. I mean, I don't think this impacts our long term view of Bitcoin.
The long term view of Bitcoin. I mean, Bitcoin will be well through 100K and
beyond.
And beyond at some point. Right here, right now, though, it does not.
Everything looks pretty weak. I mean, you got the dollar and the 10-year, and even gold is,
Gold's actually up.
It's up today, yeah.
It's up.
But there were some sell-off days, like when Bitcoin was selling off, that even gold was selling off, and it was basically everyone was just like buying dollars, like just everything they have.
No, I mean it's a really tough environment.
Okay, so and then last thing, if inflation by, I guess core PCE would be the one the Fed really cares about, but and unemployment is up. If inflation is tampered and unemployment's up, we're looking at cuts, right, from the Fed.
Yes, but there's a small caveat. The read-through into core PCE was actually a bit more positive for PCE, like higher PCE.
Yeah, interesting.
But you'll get more of that data tomorrow with PPI. But again, it's backward looking. Like we really need to be thinking about like what is the wealth effect going to do when S&P and NASDAQ drop 10% plus in correction territory? Like how is that going to impact spending? How's that going to impact corporations in terms of their hiring plans? Right? Are they going to stop hiring? Are they going to lay off more people? Right? Like it's really hard to justify laying off people when your stock's at all-time highs and going higher. When it's moving off a cliff, right? It's a lot easier to be like, hey, like I have a fiduciary duty to my shareholders to, increase returns and maximize profits. So I need to lay off my 10% of my worst workers. Like it's a lot easier to do that type of stuff. And so, I think we're headed for a slowdown in the U.S. It could be a recession. Depends on how you define a recession. Is it 2 quarters of negative GDP growth? Is it
20% stock market
correction?
Yeah.
Whatever. But if the administration is really serious about cutting spending, like that's a big deal. Yeah. $2 trillion or $1 trillion less in spending per year is a lot. And my final point is, I'd like to remind folks that Trump, at some point, will cause a government shutdown. Last presidency, he had a 35-day government shutdown, and that was the longest in history, right? And these guys seem to have a commitment to actually doing fiscal right. And I think it's a correct commitment, by the way.
It's ambitious, and it's
ambitious,
impressive.
But like normally the ambitious goals are the only ones worth doing. And I think if I was a president and I was thinking 10, 20, 30 years out, these are exactly the type of policies I'd be trying to pursue. And what do you do if you're a second-term president? You touch the third rail.
Yeah.
Which is what? Entitlement spending and military spending.
Yep.
And I think he'll go there. And if you go there, that's shutdown.
This is one of the first people that's presidents in decades that's had the appetite for short-term gain to get long-term short-term pain to get long-term gain. And the problems in the country are big. Yeah. But they affect the market. So pay attention, people. This is the sit forward moment in your chair. I think when it comes to markets. All right, our friend Beimnet Abebe from Galaxy Trading, as always, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's go now to our guest, Will Foxley, co-founder of Blockspace Media. Will, welcome back to Galaxy Brains.
Thanks, Alex.
You were last on this show August 2023. I think you announced Blockspace. Mm-hmm. It's now been, I guess, a year and a half, 18 months-ish.
Yeah.
How's it going?
Yeah, July will be 2 years of me quitting my last job and starting the company. And it's going pretty well. I mean, it's like stressful. Being an entrepreneur, actually, not just having your bio, actually kind of sucks. But it is like fun to have your own shop, and I think we're doing some important stuff in the Bitcoin scene. So.
Yeah, you've done some really interesting stuff. So first of all, let's tell people what Blockspace is, because I think maybe your flagships had been podcasts, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, that's part of our problem probably is, we have these podcasts I think people know. The Mining Pod's probably the most well-known, and then we have Bitcoin Season 2 and the Gort Show. You've had Gort on this pod?
I have had Gort on this pod, yes.
Yeah, so Gort's one of our podcasters. I think a lot of people know those podcast brands at this point. We work with CoinDesk. We syndicate there. Not everyone knows the Blockspace brand, which we're trying to fix, obviously, get that bigger. But we're an industry publication. So Bitcoin Magazine is like rah-rah for maxis, come to the conference, get a whale pass, and they're crushing. There's no real place to kind of go and get all your Bitcoin news and analysis as it's kind of happening in the industry, whether it be mining, tech and development, markets, things like that. So we're trying to round all that out into one industry place. A good corollary would be Data Center Dynamics, which covers the data center industry, or Industry Dive, which has a bunch of different sub-brands that covers tons of different things, like the manufacturing industry or the solar industry. A good example is Payload Space, if you've seen them. They just cover the space industry from an insider's perspective.
Makes sense.
So they're typical readers, someone who works at NASA.
There's one that we used to read at Fidelity called Ignites, which is a fund industry newspaper publication, right, that everybody at Fidelity would read. Nice. So I think you've done that, and it makes a lot of sense. You have great content on mining for sure. That's your show, the Mining Pod. It's quite good.
Thank you.
You had the Swan guys on that show. Didn't you, a year ago?
We never had this.
I know.
We did.
When they announced that they were going to start mining or something, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we had Rafa.
Yes.
January 2024. They kind of came out of the... I'd heard some rumors about them, and hash rate had been growing up and things like that. And we got them on the show, and we talked about them deploying tons of S19Ks and then getting into some of the newer units. They're pretty secretive. Yeah. But most people knew it was Tether funding, Swan operations, and then kind of this behind-the-scenes team that had been deep in mining, but no one knew who was operating there.
And they hadn't been very public. You're right. A lot of people at the time in the mining industry either knew or had suspicions of how they were doing this. Because remember, Corey was out here posting these giant hash rate numbers, 5 exahash. That's a lot. That's a big operation. That's nothing small.
Especially at the time.
Yeah.
Because hash rate's gone up parabolically, even more so since then.
I know.
So
but
5 exahash was
big,
huge.
though. That's gigawatt probably. That's a lot of electricity.
Yeah.
So we were how this little company that was a Bitcoin brokerage all of a sudden, become into possession of all this hash rate. Well, you've since been covering this story, which has developed a lot.
Yeah, it has.
I think you guys have been the primary source for coverage. What has happened in that story?
For better or worse, we've been the primary source of coverage for it. We've been covering that genesis in January 2024. Subsequent summer, July 2024, Corey tweeted that there was going to be the end of the managed mining services, quote unquote, that's how we called it. There were some layoffs at Swan. A lot of people, decent amount of their company got laid off. And then in August, we saw some more things start rolling out about what's up with the mining services? Why did it end? And by the end of September, we got our hands on the lawsuit that Swan had against its former employees. And that's basically the story of how it all came to pass. Is the former employees, Swan alleged, were trying to steal the mining business and run away with it. The former employers kind of worked into this new company called Proton Management, which I think has changed its name again since then, as all these things happen.
Whatever.
Everyone changes their name once a week.
Yeah.
That story just kept getting more juicy as time went on. Things were not adding up on the Swan side. We just kept talking to them, and before we knew it, there was rumors of another lawsuit in the UK High Court between Tether and Swan. So for Tether and Swan had entered into a JV agreement to do this mining operation. Tether was the capital, Swan was the execution. Most of the IP and everything was supposed to reside in the JV itself. But it seems like there's disagreement over that, and there's allegations back and forth if Swan should have the IP or not. And that's sort of like the nexus or the point of the whole California case is like, should Swan have the IP or not?
That's Swan suing the employees who left for stealing the IP.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Tether's still working with that former team, Proton Management, now probably under another name. And that operation continues to grow, and it's huge. They're a huge Bitcoin miner, huge private miner. I don't have the numbers, but just from knowing kind of rumors here and there, I know that they're quite large compared to public miners. So it's obviously of interest for Bitcoiners to know who's mining Bitcoin and who's kind of getting up to what. The Swan case continues.
But then you said Tether is now suing Swan in the UK.
Yes.
For what? Also for breach of some of the agreement or something?
Yeah, so that's an interesting case kind of going on right now. Difficult to understand because the UK court system only releases information based on you asking for it, and they won't release all the information.
It's not just a public docket like
It's
in the US.
really annoying.
Yeah.
So like we had to ask them about a month ahead of time to get it, and then we only got some documents. The breaches that Tether alleges are basically, why are you going after our employees?
So cease
in
and desist
California?
on this suit.
Some funds that were stuck in BitGo that were basically Bitcoin that was mined by the JV. Swan had access to it. Tether wanted the funds because via the JV, they were supposed to get all the Bitcoin back from the mining op. And then the last part was over alleged breach of contract by encumbering shares of the JV to Ripple. And so the allegation there is that Swan at some point entered into an agreement with Ripple, and as part of that agreement, they encumbered the shares of the JV, and they didn't exclude the shares of the JV. Basically, the agreement was like a senior debt obligation to Ripple, which would include more or less the entirety of Swan's company, how it's written, which would include the JV. And so Tether obviously took issue with that. The question now that we're kind of at is like, did this happen? Did it not happen? We know it was terminated. The agreement was terminated in October of last year, so it looks like it never happened. Corey came out on Twitter and said it never happened.
The agreement that resulted in the allegations
Yeah.
by Tether that the JV shares that Swan still had were somehow encumbered in this thing with Ripple.
Yep.
That
Yeah.
agreement, as Corey has said, doesn't exist.
It says
It may have existed, but it now doesn't.
It did exist, but it's unclear if it was executed. So we know that there was some sort of conversation between the two of them and some sort of relationship between Swan and Ripple. It's unclear what that relationship entailed. And it was terminated in October. Probably what happened was there was some sort of desire to purchase an asset that Ripple had. Swan desired to purchase it. It fell through at a certain point. But
Basically.
Tether knew about the lien on the shares, on the encumbered shares, got
see.
pissed about it, went to court.
Added that in their lawsuit. Well, it's
Yeah.
been a fascinating story.
Yeah, it has
It
been.
involves some really big players in Bitcoin in general, and of course Tether, obviously a massive player in crypto. And you guys have been covering it a lot. Can't get everything right. You had a little. I respected how quickly you made an edit to the story about the Ripple part.
Yeah, we swung and missed on that one, corrected it, did the whole journalism good responsibility thing.
No,
but,
you guys did great. And I didn't realize when you told me about Blockspace that you were going to be doing. I mean, this has been. I really encourage people to read Blockspace's stuff on this story in particular. You guys are the coverage of this story.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of like arcane and deep legal readings and stuff. It's not like 800 words at CoinDesk of this happened, right? This is a lot of investigative reporting you guys have been doing, which I was surprised and really happy to see. I feel like there's not nearly enough of that in Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, I think these companies are getting to mature enough size where, one, there's enough money to be interesting to cover them. Tether's huge, billions of dollars. Paulo's down in Washington, D.C. this week talking to Trump. These companies deserve better coverage and better scrutiny. No one's really doing it in this space, minus a few hits from a few reporters here and there. I think like CoinDesk still has like Ian Allison, Danny Nelson.
Yep.
Sam Kessler, a few other people.
Laura Shin has some people like Veronica who does policy, good policy.
Yeah.
Even Bloomberg breaks some stories a decent amount.
Well, I think that's actually why Bloomberg specifically is a reason why you don't see as much coverage, because Bloomberg moved into the space and a lot of the reading attention went to Bloomberg. And so I think a lot of the crypto pubs that are like natively built to cover the industry have started to fizzle a little bit. The opportunity we saw at Blockspace is like the Bitcoin industry still doesn't, it's not understood well. Like mining has never been understood well. The players in the market making space are not understood well. And the Bitcoin development landscape certainly is completely obscure. So like we saw an opportunity to make an industry rag around that, and we've been trying to execute on it for 2 years.
You have some great podcasts too. I mentioned the mining pod. Yes, Gwart.
Yeah.
Gwart, the Gwart Show, Gwarty Gwart on Twitter. I think my audience should know. We've had
At
Gwart
Gwarty
on this
Gwart.
show.
Yeah.
Gwart is a very, very funny commentator on Twitter, but actually also an excellent interviewer.
Yes.
Knows a lot, not just about Bitcoin, but about a lot of altcoins and protocols. Great stuff with him. And who's been on there? Hasu? Did he have Hasu? He's had a bunch of really talented people,
I
thoughtful.
don't think he's had Hasu.
Maybe it wasn't
yet.
Hasu, but he had like
I don't know if he wants Hasu on, but
did he have Charbonneau on there? I think he might have.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was a
Jonathan.
good one. He's got. I mean, I'm saying it's if you are interested in thinkery about blockchains, it's a really good podcast for that. I mean, he goes deep into protocol design and stuff. Very thoughtful, not just the funny Gwarty Gwart snark from Twitter, which is also a great account.
It is surprising he's been able to like merge these two things together: his Twitter snark and then his like thoughtful podcastness.
Yeah,
Because I think it's like one of the go-to podcasts right now in terms of like if you want good intellectual coverage of the space.
yeah.
Because a lot of that kind of vacated after 21. Like people were just like burnt out, and so there was an opportunity there. So I teamed up with him to make that show. He's been running it now for over a year and crushing it.
Crazy, it's been that long.
I know.
I would say there have been some podcasts with good intellectual discussion that haven't gone
I think
away.
this is right up there with it. Gort and Galaxy Brains.
Let's talk about Bitcoin development. You mentioned, not well covered at all.
Yeah.
Frankly, barely even understood by people in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Lots of very private people are the developers, misunderstandings about what the Bitcoin repo is on GitHub and what it really means and is about different implementations. Is the core repo truly like core development team, or is that just one implementation? Yeah. There's kind of a lot of answers to these questions. You guys cover it well. You also, though, have, as any good industry rag does, expanded a little bit into the conference game.
The conference circuit, baby.
So you've only done one, right? Opnext, it's called. And I like this. It's a great name, by the way. Referring to opcodes, which are effectively functions in Bitcoin script. It's usually op something. Op underscore something is a think about like a command that you can execute in Bitcoin or a function you can call. So for example, you can put data in arbitrary data, right? And so you use the op return field, which is a field of data or a function that you can use to put arbitrary data on a Bitcoin transaction. And there's a bajillion of these, obviously.
Yeah.
And there were more. In fact, there were a lot more opcodes. Satoshi took a lot of them out at some point because they were either redundant or dangerous.
Yeah.
But there's debate about putting some back, as there often is. Yeah. And so you named your conference Opnext, which I guess the focus is what is the next opcode, right?
Yeah. The question is like, how do we scale Bitcoin? So for history lesson here, 2015 to 2019, there was a really important conference series. Most conference series are not important.
We'll talk about that in a second.
But 2015, 2019, there was the conference series Scaling Bitcoin. Did you ever go to those?
I did not.
Yeah, they're international, so it's kind of hard to go to.
And at Fidelity, I was at Fidelity at the time.
Yeah.
Wasn't very interested in sending us places.
Yeah. I mean, like, also it was a scaling conference for Bitcoin, so, like, no one's going to go. The only people – you can still watch the YouTube videos, and I tell people to go watch them all the time because some of the most important things that have happened in Bitcoin since 2015, 2019 have come out of those conferences. So I think like Frost, Miniscript, some like the SegWit and Taproot upgrades were discussing these things. And basically the idea is let's get the most important thinkers, developers, capital, Bitcoin ideologues in the same room in a conference venue somewhere around the world once a year. And let's talk about scaling Bitcoin. How do we get Bitcoin to the next billion users? Like right now, I don't know how many people use Bitcoin, but like it's not into the billions. Doesn't matter to some people, but to me it does. Like the fact that we want Bitcoin to be global money means that we have to make engineering changes to Bitcoin to make that happen. Like that's just undisputably true, whether that happens on a layer 2 or whether it happens on the base layer or whether that happens in a side project. We'll find out. But that conference series ended after 2019. The organizers got burnt out, as a lot of people did, or after that.
I mean, that, the block size wars probably took a lot. I know a lot was discussed there.
And Taproot, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, and Jeremy Rubin was one of the key conference organizers, and he championed Taproot. That happened. He started championing CTV, his own project. He more or less got ridiculed a lot for his project, decided to quit Bitcoin for a while, has kind of come back into the fold the last 2 years, and is interested in many projects again. But we were looking at the conference circuit, we're looking at our abilities and been like, we need this for Bitcoin again. Like we need a neutral place for everyone to join. So we ran the first one at the Fidelity office.
Yeah, in Boston.
Your own old HQ.
Were you up on the 14th floor or were you in the auditorium?
The main first floor.
Yeah, right inside that big, nice auditorium.
It was perfect.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. So like more academic themed.
A lot of people have spoken there,
keynotes.
by the way. That's a lot of big Bitcoin luminaries over the years.
Real?
That's where Abby and the
That's awesome.
Fidelity Center for Applied Technology, either there or up on the 14th
Yeah.
floor typically, where there's also big meeting space. I mean, a whole number of people. I mean, I can't even remember the list at this point, but I mean, like Zuko Wilcox and Jeff Garzik and William Mugayar. Remember that guy? Like, I mean, just a giant list of like 40 people that we brought over the years to speak at Fidelity. Vitalik Buterin spoke in that auditorium.
Let's go.
So, I mean, it's
Should we get Vitalik to
it's also really easy. It's easy to get to the airport. It's right next to South Station. It's a great location, actually.
Yeah.
It is all the way, in Boston, not like in the middle of the country or whatever. But
Yeah.
So how was that though? That was when was that?
It was November. Wow. And I think it was a big success for us at the very least. Like we didn't lose money, so that's huge as a media startup. But I think what it did do is helped refocus the conversation actually around CTV. It was very interesting walking out of that auditorium that day.
Check, template, verify.
Check, template, verify, which is a covenant designed for Bitcoin. Basically, bring back a word from earlier in the conversation, encumbers. Basically says like, if I have some Bitcoin here, I can kind of make a predetermined path for where it should go in the future, hence the term covenant. Developed a few years ago. The idea's been out there. It's been kicked around a lot. Rejected at one point, but it's come back in the conversation, mostly because of OpCat and what the Taproot Wizards and Starkware have been pushing for.
Agitated a lot and got people thinking about
Super agitated.
doing opcodes, new opcodes.
Has anyone from Taproot Wizards been on here? Eric,
I've had Udi on. I haven't had Eric on yet.
Yeah, you should get Eric for sure.
Well, I wanted him to come on, but he doesn't like to come to New York. That's what he said.
Well, you do this remote sometimes.
I try not to. I try hard not to. But yes, I do.
Yeah, that's good.
But yeah, I mean, I've had, and obvious, by the way, I've had Reindell on the show as well.
Yeah.
And I've had certainly other people that have worn the Taproot Wizards icon on Twitter, like Nick Carter and Jameson Lopp, and which I think they just think it's funny. I don't know why Nick has that icon. It's just funny, I think, in his mind. I think he just thinks it's funny. It's like a troll. But you're right. They trolled their way into OpCat, which is an interesting opcode also, one that Satoshi themselves wrote.
Can you sing the song?
What, the Song of Day Man song?
Yeah.
I don't know the song, no. But I do know I know that it exists.
Yeah.
That guy's Song of Day Man's pretty great separately.
Catchy.
Also.
It's very catchy.
That's a good one?
The song's pretty good.
Yeah. He's got one every day. There have been a couple other good ones too over the
Yeah.
years. Some anti-Gensler songs that were pretty solid.
Yeah, and it's solid.
So what you're saying is that Taproot Wizards with their, I don't know, social media campaign. I mean, they have a Quantum Cats is a ordinal collection. Oh, I said the word ordinal. Ordinal collection.
Yeah, you said you weren't going to say that.
I know I did. It's an ordinal collection that's effectively based on OpCat and meant to promote it. So you think that helped reinvigorate or the debate about adding new opcodes?
I think it pissed a lot of people off. I think it brought a lot of attention to the Bitcoin Core ecosystem. I think it brought a lot of attention to a corner of Bitcoin people were happy to forget about. Most people are just interested in number go up, or they're interested in the ETF game, which certainly is super interesting and stuff we cover at Blockspace as well. But like this Bitcoin Core landscape matters a lot, right? Like if it's a $2 trillion asset now and hopefully it goes up quite a bit, like this code base matters quite a bit. And like making sure that the code base is scalable into the future matters so much. And so for us at Blockspace and with this conference, the idea is let's bring all the stakeholders together, miners, developers, Bitcoin Core, other people in that area, and have them have a conversation around this. And we decided to run it back really quickly 6 months later at the strategy office.
Yep.
Because they're a huge stakeholder in Bitcoin.
Fidelity, strategy, like I mean, they're both big stakeholders and great locations.
Yeah.
By the way,
they're
Strategy's
stakeholders.
office in Tyson's Corner, right, Northern Virginia, easy to get to, right near DC.
Yep.
They have that
Trying to make
new.
it simple.
They got a great team there, Sharish, and got Ed now, right? Who's like what's his title? Chief Bitcoin Advocate or
I
something?
don't know, but
something like
that's
that.
great. He's one person who really helped kind of spearhead this because he came to the last OpNext and he really enjoyed it, and then he invited us to throw in a strategy, and of course we took that opportunity up. It cost
So
some
that's what, in
controversy, and-
April?
Yep, April 11th, 12th.
There you go.
Discount code. Just kidding.
Well,
can throw you guys one.
I think it's been very interesting. I do think that maybe it is OpCat that helped move the Overton window in favor of CTV. Jeremy was very aggressive in promoting CTV in like 21 too.
Yes.
And that, I think people just recoiled from that a bit. But now when you step back, you see, James O'Byrne at OpVault and a bunch of these other ones, and they're all, a lot of them are good, interesting, good ideas. It turns out that Jeremy's OpCTV might be the cleanest and also most conservative one. And so you know that when you've got the agitators, Udi and Eric, calling for this crazy thing and selling cat pictures about it, it makes it a lot easier to be like, well, that's the one I don't like if you don't like one.
Yeah.
And it makes the conservative, kind of much more investigated and researched OpCTV look pretty good. By the way, vaults, one use case for covenants, which is vaulted custody, is one way. You talked about creating encumbering coins with path-dependent outcomes. Literally, I send you a coin, and I can say you can only spend it in this way.
Yeah.
Right, or at this time, but what you can do with, I think one of the most talked about use cases for covenants is vaulted custody, where you can basically say like, if somebody steals my coins, they can actually only like send them in a certain way, and during that period, I can actually like overwrite the transaction and claw them back. There's many versions of ways to design this, but you do think it would vastly improve custody.
I think it would, and like think of all the ETF providers. So we actually have the Coinbase custody team coming down.
OpNext?
To OpNext.
Oh, wow.
So their CEO, Rick Schonenberg, will be there joining a panel with Rob Hamilton of AnchorWatch, Pete Rizzo, and then Bitwise's head of research. So
Ryan Rasmussen.
Yeah, if you want to,
all
make
of
the
those
journey,
people have been on this podcast except for Ryan.
what?
But
Okay.
yes, have had.
I'll give him a plug.
Rob have had.
you.
Wait, who was the other people you said? Rob,
Ryan, and Rick,
and one more.
Rizzo.
And Rizzo. So Rizzo and Rob have been on here. You've been on here. I haven't
Yes.
had Rick. I did meet Rick in DC this week.
Nice.
And I know Ryan. I spoke at MicroStrategy in Vegas last year with Ryan. So also very
nice.
smart. It's gonna be. I mean, that's a panel discussion.
Yeah, not trying to like name drop for name drop's sake. Just saying like those people are going to be talking about the thing you just brought up, which is
Custody uses.
what custody solutions do ETFs in Wall Street want, and are they even thinking about this? Like, do they even care? I think from most of the emails I've gotten back from these people when I pitch the conference to them, they're like, "We hand it to Coinbase and we don't think about it again," and that's why we had to get Coinbase in the room because now we have to ask them. Like, how are you guys handling all this Bitcoin? And it might be, a pretty short conversation. It's like, we have a cool multi-sig, and then that's kind of a wrap. But I do think, like, there should be more conversation around vaults, around covenants that these institutions should know about. Because at the end of the day, they are holding 20% of the Bitcoin supply right now.
Yeah.
And it's important. And you guys at Galaxy do that too.
If you're a custodian,
Yeah.
you should be interested in custody technology. If you're a trading company, you should be interested in trading technology. If they have an established, whether it's like big custodians, Anchorage, Coinbase, Fidelity, BNY Mellon, Gemini, whomever, right? Like, sure, they've got it built already. So like, you're not trying to go in and like constantly like upgrade your security behind the, the armed guard and whatever. But like, you should absolutely, especially if new technology becomes available on the Bitcoin network, like a vaulting, a covenant opcode. Yeah, they got to know about that, and maybe they should use it. I think it's very interesting. You're pushing the ball forward well on the technology.
We're trying as a layman. We're trying with the media.
So do you think now we talk about the Overton windows though for CTV? I mean, we think that the Bitcoin community, the Bitcoin governing body.
Are you part of that?
I'm not sure. Are you? Are we? I don't know. I don't.
What
Not
do you
really.
mean?
I don't know. Well,
I think we're in it.
Let's not. We
You're
are. Let's
certainly
not
in
do.
it.
We're in the Bitcoin community. Will the Bitcoin community come to a consensus this year on adding an opcode on a soft fork proposal?
The last few weeks have made me the most bullish on it over the last 2 years. So like a lot of people thought CAT was going to happen last year. I did not, and I thought it was just like a moment in the wind. Ordinals were doing well, and there was a lot of money tied to OpCat with that. Blew out. A lot of like non-interest in CAT right now, it seems like. Just kind of it's there, but I think like with CTV and Check Stick from Stack, CSFS, which is Stephen Roos's and Jeremy Rubin's proposal. They kind of worked on this in the fall. That seems to be a winner, and I think it makes almost everyone happy because like the Tapper Wizard, Starkware crowd with wants CAT, this sort of like works for them in their own ways. I mean, they have some really cracked developers, and they'll be able to
figure out how to make use of it.
They'll make it work. And then on the other side, like CTV and these things are conservative enough and interesting enough for, I think, maxis to be like, okay, yeah. And I think the ossifiers would even be like, you know what, this is good.
One of the big wrong criticisms of CTV a few years ago was that it could, I forget what they call these, but basically it could create perpetual covenants. That there's a name for it, I can't remember what it's called, but where they live on encumbered forever. Right. And the fear was that like a government could go to a custodian or like let's say a retail exchange, and they could say, hey, you can't let your users withdraw unless you give them these perpetually encumbered coins that, for example, the government could seize one day using the covenant. That is actually, people used to say this to Jeremy, that's actually expressly impossible with CTV and is possible with some of the other covenant proposals. Yeah. So I think people finally started to realize that like that was like the big fear of covenants. Like, what if the government put some covenants on my coins, bro, right? Well, that's actually not really possible, like to do like covenants that go in perpetuity with CTV. So I remember that was some education has occurred.
Good fact checking on this show.
I'm just saying that was a thing I saw on Twitter. In Clubhouse even back then, people were coming in saying the government's going to cover my coins. Yeah, and I was like, well, I mean, sure, they could vault custody a withdrawal, but like after it's unvaulted, it's done on CTV. It doesn't live forever. Do
you think it's going to happen this year?
I think we're going to get some. I don't know how to measure this exactly. Yeah. We're going to achieve consensus on what the next soft fork should be. Yeah. So I don't think the soft fork will occur in 25, but maybe in 26, right? Maybe we'll get like, and I agree. I mean, there's a lot. I'm not sure that CAT is out. I'm not, and I mean that I'm not sure. I'm not sure that. See, I know that like literally the last several weeks, like everyone is really excited about. Not everyone. A lot of people are really excited about CTV and CSFS. I did like that Vortex came back from like being gone forever. This for our audience, if you don't know Vortex, long time early Bitcoin influencer. Something Vortex on Twitter, you can find him. He came back and made a landing page where people could come and show. He had listed all of these proposed opcodes, and people could say what they were interested in. And it became pretty clear after a few weeks of people adding their preferences there that there was a lot of coalescing around CTV for sure. Yeah. And OpCat also had a lot of support there and I don't mean just like, I think it was open source. Anybody could add their stuff to it, but like from a lot of prominent developers, right? So regardless of which, though, I do think there's some movement, and I don't, Michael Saylor is very concerned about upgrades.
Yeah, he's cool to host this thing, so I think he might.
That's interesting. Yeah. You're right, actually. Now that I think about it, he's quite famously like cautious on upgrades. I would say that's it makes sense. You got a giant stack. You want to be very careful and not to mess up your stack, right?
But the strategy team is like very open on Bitcoin. Like they've had in-house Bitcoin development stuff, and they just opened that new floor in the strategy office for Bitcoiners to come in and work on projects. I know, it's very cool. It's like I think he gets a lot of hits because he's a billionaire and
he's very, very prominent and vocal. I mean, he's and I don't really disagree with him that like caution is warranted.
100%.
But I do think that's why it's like, well, maybe that's why we didn't get CTV in 21, but now maybe why we might get it in 25 or 6. I mean, I think it's been looked at. Like, things should go slowly, but there is progress, which is quite interesting.
At least we're having a conference about it.
I know. There you go. Wait, so it turns out conferences do matter?
A few of them do.
We were talking about this before.
Are conferences dead? Do you enjoy going to them? Which ones do you enjoy going to? How about that?
Why don't, without naming which ones I enjoy, why don't I tell you the ones that I went to last year? All right, because I did go to a lot of them. I went to Bitcoin 24. I went to MicroStrategy in Vegas. I went to Token 2049 in Singapore. I went to Permissionless in Salt Lake. I went to Consensus in Austin. And I'm wondering if I'm forgetting anything. And I'm going to the Digital Asset Summit, Blockworks' event. In New York. I don't think I went to that last year, but and I'm for sure forgetting a couple. I went to the BPI Summit, which was great. A lot of variety.
Yeah.
I would say the giant industry conferences, particularly Consensus, which is now kind of losing to Token as the biggest tent you can imagine conference. Not my favorite. Not a ton of signal there in general.
Yeah.
Consensus, ironically, I think getting a little bigger over the years as it's gotten smaller. I cannot say a bad thing about the Bitcoin conference from Bitcoin Magazine. It's just too damn fun.
It is super fun.
It is absolutely like a giant
carnival
bonanza.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I got a lot of friends who go to that. It's a lot of fun to be there. I think in general, I prefer, I would say segment specific or smaller. So I had a lot of permissionless. The Bankless conference was really good in Salt Lake. It was small and good and thoughtful, and a lot of smart people there. It was like much more productive conversation type environment for an industry professional. I think it depends on what you need. If you're selling, if you're selling services to retail, then you got to be at those big giant ones.
Yeah.
I don't agree with our friend Nick Carter who said that they're dead. I do agree that they're quite stressful, expensive. Lots of traveling,
hangovers, bad food, hotel nights.
Can't really, all that's true. That remains true. Yeah. Some of them are still big targets for me. I mean, again, I'm very much looking forward to Bitcoin in Las Vegas.
Vegas is gonna be fun. I don't think anyone's not looking forward to that one.
I don't even like Vegas, but in fact, I went for the first time ever last year for the MicroStrategy conference, the Bitcoin for Corporations conference. But Germano was there, and I was hanging out with it was like me and Mike Germano and Dylan LeClaire and American Hodl hanging out. Like, it was pretty solid. It's a pretty good group. Oh, shouldn't leave off. I love this one, Cheat Code in the UK, which is the reason that I won't be able to go to OpCodes.
I know, it's great. It's the influencer conference and the developer conference, same weekend, different cities.
We were actually joking last year at that conference, Peter McCormack's conference. But we're a proud sponsor of the Real Bedford FC, so we like to go also and show our support. But I was joking last year, we just had so much fun with the other speakers, and I was saying, maybe Blockspace should do this joke, or like, are you involved in PodConf? Is that you? I don't know who are the PodConf guys.
I think I know who it is, but I don't want to ruin it.
Yeah, I don't either. But I was like, what if we have a speaker con? We just only invite speakers, just no audience at all.
I mean, that's a lot of these conferences, which is Nick's whole point.
I agree with that. But I'm friends with a lot of people that speak at these conferences, and it's always good for me to go and hang out with the industry. They are, for a global industry, some of them can be really good meeting places for people that work together online.
Totally. I mean, I think just speaking from an empty room so often with these things, maybe it's just I don't have the poll, or the other people down with the poll who are on there because I'm normally moderating. But it just gets to you after a while. It's like boring.
Oh, I've experienced that.
I think from
literally even at a good conference.
Yeah, it can be
sometimes
tough.
You're just like you're on the side stage and there's just literally nobody there.
Yeah.
In fact, the first time I spoke at the Bitcoin conference, I think was 22.
Yeah.
And I did a pretty interesting panel, Bitcoin VC, with somebody from Stillmark and somebody from UTXO and Chris from Trammell Venture Partners. It was a good panel.
Solid group.
And the room was there was 5 people in that room. Granted, I think it was also head-to-head with Saylor at the time. Yeah. But that can be demoralizing for sure.
Yeah. No, it's tough. I mean, last thought on it.
And by the way, 3 of those 5 were Amanda Fabiano and my friends from Galaxy. But you have a different. Yours is not like these conferences. Yours is a very focused meeting of developers and thoughtful people on the protocol.
We can only fit 200 people in the room, and a quarter of those, maybe a little less than a quarter, will be speakers. So the purpose is, and we mostly do invites. So I mean, you got an invite, declined it.
Very nice.
All cool.
I'm sorry.
But we mostly just do invites because we want to have like the people in the room who are actually like able to talk about these things. So it's like we invited people on various Bitcoin teams' engineering staff, specifically their CTOs or their high-level developers to go. And I think just in general, like the media landscape is going to be changing. Like these conferences, they grow, they'll gobble up the other ones. All the other conferences die, and then there's opportunities for different types of media, whether that be like better newsletters, webinars, stuff like that. So
yeah, you're right. It is an ebb and flow. It definitely grows and evolves. I mean, there was also the adopting Bitcoin conferences that were quite good, similar on technology.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Well, I'm proud of Blockspace.
Thanks, Alex.
Don't listen to the Mining Pod, but do check out Guardy Guard's show. No, I'm just kidding. Truly, and I have to say, like for Bitcoin-only coverage, Bitcoin Magazine is a magazine. It's not really in journalism.
Yeah.
I mean, it is. They got great people there, too, you know, that cover it. Like Frank Corvo, who I think has a
they have 2
White House
reporters
press
now.
pass.
It's pretty sick. Like, I'm jealous.
So they do some, but again, it's more of a magazine than a newspaper or news website. You guys have taken a little bit of a different approach. I think it's much needed, quite interesting. Yeah. So check out their coverage at blockspace.media. And my friend Will Foxley, thank you for coming back to Galaxy Brains.
Thanks, Alex.
That's it for this week's episode of Galaxy Brains. Thank you to our guest Will Foxley, co-founder of Blockspace Media. Check them out, blockspace.media on the web. And our friend Beimnet Abebe from Galaxy Trading, as always. Everyone have a safe and happy weekend. We will see you next week. Thanks for listening to Galaxy Brains, the weekly podcast from Galaxy Research. If you enjoy the show, please like, rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. To follow Galaxy Research, sign up for our weekly newsletter at gdr.email, read our content at galaxy.com/research, and follow us on Twitter at GLXY Research. See you next week.